I think it is important to move ahead with times because the legacy approaches that have been used for the last 5-10 years, especially in the renewables, won't work in the next 5 years, especially because we are moving from an era of subsidized renewable energies where you were paid for the electricity irrespective of when it was generated. So all you cared about, I'm putting my plant over here and what's my annual generation going to be, and I'm happy. But we are moving towards an era where it just doesn't matter how much of electricity you generate, but it also matters when you generate that electricity. So when the time aspect of it comes into the equation, the energy systems have to be more sophisticated, more complex. You need to combine different sources of renewable energies together. And the legacy approaches of yesterday simply won't work.
Welcome to Asia Climate Finance, your front row seat to the policies, investments, and actors shaping climate business and finance across Asia Pacific. Subscribe now so others find this essential guide to Asia's climate economy, and note the disclaimers at the end. Now over to the host, analyst, investor, and author, Joseph Jacobelli.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're listening from. Welcome to episode 78 of Asia Climate Finance. Today we dive into the world of solar data. It is a key anchor of the energy transition. We often talk about building solar farms, but we rarely discuss the fuel behind them, namely the sun itself. Our guest is Goenka from Solargis, the leading solar data and software provider. Harsh is an expert in solar resource assessment and forecasting. He actually refers to his company as a credit rating agency for the sun. This data is absolutely vital. Accurate figures reduce risk for investors. They also help grid operators balance supply and demand. We will explore how high-quality data can bridge the investment gap in Asia Pacific. Harsh explains how AI is refining weather models. We discuss why forecasting helps us move away from coal. By predicting solar output, we can manage batteries more effectively. This helps provide steady baseload power, even when the sun is not shining. It is a fascinating look at making our green future more bankable. As always, for comments and ideas, please email the address at the top of the show note. Hello, Harsh, and how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me in the show.
Thank you so much for making it. It is a topic that I'm actually fascinated about. It's obviously very focused on solar and on data. But given that solar is, I think everybody would agree, the fastest growing form of renewable energy in the world, not just China. It's getting cheaper, it's getting quicker to put it all up. So I think it's very important. Harsh, maybe we can just start simply by a very quick introduction of yourself and maybe your company as well, because not everybody may be very familiar with the company.
Sure. So you can think of Solargis as a credit rating agency for the sun. So we tell our clients how much sun there is, which is useful in the project development phase to understand the feasibility of the project, what is going to be the return on investment, and so on.
I see.
And once the project is on the ground, it's operational, we help our clients understand, is the project performing adequately? And we also support grid operators with forecasting so that they can balance the supply and demand on the grid by knowing accurately what the solar generation is going to be for the next hours or next days.
Do you also provide solar data ahead of the project? Say, I want to put up a solar farm in France, and I need to work out the solar irradiation data. Is that something also that you do, or you just do a post-project?
Yeah, that's at a core of what we do. So essentially, we are providing data, software, and professional consultancy services. So most of the work we are doing is in a SaaS business model or a data as a service business model, and some ad hoc consultancy along with that.
Based on a little bit of homework I was able to do, because again, I wasn't familiar with your company, apologies. But Solargis has built a reputation for providing some of the most accurate solar results data globally. How is this quantified? How do we quantify accuracy in this particular sector? And how does this perception translate into real world benefits for the developers and investors in the Asia Pacific region specifically? I mean, not just Asia Pacific, but given that we try to focus on Asia, where weather variability can be quite challenging.
So the data that we are providing to our customers, that's all model data, where we use satellite imagery as a primary input when modeling the data. And to understand how accurate that model data is, what we've done is we are comparing the model data with quality controlled ground measurements at hundreds of locations globally, several of them which are in the Asia Pacific region as well. And when we do this comparison, we look at what is the bias of the model data versus the ground measurements, what is the root mean square error. And if we have several validation points, then it helps us understand what is the spread of the bias or the error, which can be translated into the uncertainty of the modeled estimates.
Understood. Now, in Asia Pacific specifically, I mean, we're talking about 50% of the population, 50% of energy consumption, and some of the energy transition estimates, annual spending is somewhere around, well, a minimum of 1 trillion. There's also some numbers out there, but I think it's very difficult to come up with an accurate number. But let's just say it's a minimum of 1 trillion in climate investment. Yet current flows fall quite short of that. We're talking about a few hundreds of billions, but definitely not even reaching the minimum of 1 trillion. How does Solargis see its role in bringing this gap by improving the quality of the data and the risk assessment for financiers?
So as investors like low risk, right?
Yeah, I'm an investor. That's what I like as well.
So, and if we have low uncertainty around the solar resource, which is the fuel behind these energy systems, then that translates into lower surprises. So I'll give you an example where not having accurate data can make things go wrong. So recently we have been speaking with solar project developer in the Philippines, and their power plants have been operational for a couple of years now. And they say that their actual production is falling short by 5%, 10% compared to what they had anticipated when they were developing the project.
And that's quite on a long-term cash flow basis. I mean, 5% is massive.
Yeah, exactly. So part of it could be because of simply year-to-year volatility in the solar resource. Maybe the last year or so was cloudier and less sunny. But part of it also has to do with simply being optimistic with the initial yield or resource estimate going into the investment.
Right.
So that's why it's so important to work with a high accuracy, low uncertainty data and assumptions when you're investing. Yeah.
Got it. Now, many countries in the region are still heavily reliant on coal-fired power plants, right? How do you personally think can better solar forecasting and performance analysis accelerate the shift towards renewables in markets such as, just to pick some of the bigger ones, India, Indonesia, and Vietnam, for example?
So I think solar forecasting plays a very important role in the transition away from coal. Let's take the example of India, right? So you may have seen in the news reports that this year the government is talking about canceling roughly 40 to 50 gigawatt of projects which were awarded in auctions, but they haven't been able to sign the power purchase agreements with the discoms. And this is despite the rates that were arrived at in these auctions were less than what it costs for coal-powered electricity. The reason why this is happening is because typically in these countries, the electricity peak is happening in the evening hours, and that's when the sun is not shining. So there is a lot of surplus solar electricity during the day, but we also need electricity between 6 to 9 p.m. So the way how in India the government is dealing with this is there is a big push towards hybrid projects where you are combining solar, wind, and batteries together to deliver baseload power. Because if you really want to transition away from coal, we need to go towards not just providing intermittent renewable energy, but we need to provide baseload renewable energy. And for that to happen effectively, solar forecasting plays a vital role, because then you can take smart decisions on when to charge the battery, when to discharge the battery. Of course, you can go and build a bigger battery, but that increases the cost. So solar forecasting can help reduce the system cost while delivering baseload power.
Right. So you're basically saying that thanks to the forecasting, you can optimize your usage of the battery, or at least at the very initial stage say, well, we need X size battery as opposed to a much bigger battery or a smaller battery. Got it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Solargis covers the entire life cycle of a solar project, right? From site selection to daily operations. Which stage do you find most critical for investors in Asia Pacific, and why?
I would say the most critical phase is the pre-construction or financing phase of the project. And this is because renewable energies projects are all about upfront capital, right? Once you have the steel on the ground, you are stuck with it for the next 25, 30 years. So if you're going to make mistakes in the development stage, you have to live with it for the entire lifetime of the project. So that's why the biggest impact we can deliver is in the development stage of the project.
Right. And it's interesting to mention the length of projects because people forget it. I think when I first started covering solar back in, I think it was 2006, very early days, when the utilization rates of the solar PV, the capacity was not as high as it is today. But I remember that everybody was forecasting 15 to 20 years. That was like the standard, right? And then the standard got to like to 20 years. And very recently, because we've got more experience with solar PV farms, everybody's finding out, oh, hold on, but this actually it's like battery usage by 20, 30 years, it's not zero. It could be 60%, could be 70% still utilization. So actually the life of the panels can be a lot longer than originally expected. And I think most people forget that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So most panel manufacturers do offer 25, 30-year warranties these days. And I've even seen IPPs which have a more long-term focus. They try to think in 30 years, 40 years perspective as well when looking into investing into these projects.
Right. You just assume like a percentage degradation of the panel, maybe a little bit more conservative, a little bit higher just to be a little bit conservative. So Solargis data has been validated at more than something like 1,500 sites worldwide when I looked at it. Could you share examples of how validation in the Asia-Pacific markets has helped to build confidence among financial institutions and institutional investors?
Sure. There was one example in Japan where we had a client who was developing a portfolio of solar projects, and their aim was to develop and sell it on to institutional investors. And when that transaction was being negotiated, there was some confusion or difference of opinions onto what is the solar resource at the site, because the other counterparties were looking at some publicly available resource data which had more conservative numbers. And our client felt that, okay, if they went ahead with those public numbers, then it reduces the transaction value or the value of the assets. So what we did in this case was we had the client measure the solar radiation using radiation sensors on site for a period of 1 year at several of their power plants. And after we collected 1 year of measurements, we were able to compare that with our model data. And at all the 10 sites, we had excellent match with the measurements, very close to zero bias. So this gave a lot of confidence to all stakeholders to go ahead with SolarGIS for the transaction purposes. Yeah.
Because of the matching, right? And I'm just curious, just a side question, just personal curiosity. The sensors at the site, is that common and is that expensive? Do many people do it or it's not that common?
So the sensors at the site are very common once the project is already operational. It is not that common when in the pre-construction phase, but we do always recommend our clients wherever it is feasible and they have time to deploy them already in the development stage, particularly when you're working on a very large project, anything above 100 megawatt or so.
Right. And I presume the cost these days is not significant, right?
Yeah, we are just talking about tens of thousands of euros to run a 1 year measurement campaign. So compared to the benefit it brings, because even a 1% reduction in uncertainty could increase the net present value of a project by millions of dollars. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Sorry, that was just a side question, my personal curiosity. Now, climate finance experts often highlight the importance of transparency and disclosure standards. How does SolarGIS ensure that its methodologies remain transparent and bankable for lenders and regulators in Asia Pacific or the rest of the world?
So transparency is actually one of the core values of our organization. And our founders are essentially, they have a scientific background, they are scientists.
Right.
And so a lot of what we do is scientifically peer reviewed. We present all our methodology in scientific publications, in papers, and we have a very extensive documentation on our website, a knowledge base where all the models, the validation results, everything is published. So it's out there for everything to see. So we do strongly believe in transparency, and we try to share everything that is not extremely proprietary.
Right. Another kind of related topic, Harsh, is talking about grids. And this grid modernization or expansion is needed pretty much anywhere in the world. Europeans complain about it. The Chinese are working hard at it. India, Indonesia is quite behind and trying to accelerate grid investments as well. So grid integration and variability are major concerns in many jurisdictions around the world, including in Asia. How does your forecasting technology help the developers or the regulators manage this risk while keeping costs under control?
Yes, you're absolutely right that variability is a big challenge, and even more so in smaller Asian countries, some of which are island countries, where there is being a surge in renewables, and renewables are starting to form a substantial share of the total energy mix. It is quite important here for grid operators to understand if there's going to be a sudden ramp, which means a sudden increase or decrease in the solar power in the next 30 minutes or an hour, so that they can accordingly schedule and manage the other sources of energy and the demand that is connected to the grid. So I'll give you one example from earlier this year. You might have read about it in the news. There was a nationwide blackout in Sri Lanka. It's not so widely known as the blackout in Spain, but if you read the news reports, it was funny because the blackout was apparently blamed on the monkeys. The news report suggested that some monkeys entered a transformer station and messed up something. But if you read between the lines, what was not said in the news reports was that this event actually happened on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. So this is when it's a very sunny day and solar power is at full strength. And Sunday is also when the demand for electricity is at the lowest.
Right.
So you do have a situation where roughly 50% of the total electricity of the country is being met by solar power. And then in such a situation, if you have a sudden ramp event, then it can create a blackout situation. So it is an extremely challenging issue that the countries will have to think how to deal with. And good forecasting system plays an essential role, especially in countries which have a lot of distributed solar, as was the case in Sri Lanka. Because if you have a few big solar power plants, then it's still manageable. But when you have a lot of thousands of small rooftop solar, then sometimes the grid operators don't even know what is connected. They don't have real-time data on that. And a lot of the consumption of the solar is happening behind the meter. So it increases the uncertainty of the accurate solar forecast. Same thing is happening now in Pakistan, where officially only 2 gigawatt or so of solar is connected to the grid. But in reality, we have something like 20 gigawatt of solar connected.
It's massive. But I think places like Australia are coping a little bit better, although Australia itself has grid modernization issues. But it seems that because they've invested quite a lot in batteries, they seem to be doing a little bit better than other places.
Definitely. So they have a much more advanced system of forecasting. They're investing a lot on storage. But despite that, even in Australia, curtailment has been on the rise. Not across the country, but there have been specific regions which has seen higher curtailment, and this has definitely had an impact on investor confidence. And people are more hesitant to invest in solar-only projects.
Yes, it's something good happening, but it's actually hurting the projects, which is a little bit weird if you think about it. But moving on to a question which is close to my heart, I care quite a bit about climate risk. And the reason behind that, I'm not sure if you agree, is that there's a lot of people, there's climate change deniers, blah, blah, blah. But climate risk is there, or whether you call it extreme events risk, you're getting floods, wildfires, and all the rest. And nobody can really argue when your city is getting flooded or your house gets getting burned down, although the house may have been there for 100 years. So what I'm getting at is, how do these extreme weather events, which are occurring more and more frequently, how do these actually impact renewable energy projects themselves? I mean, trying to work out the data around that must be incredibly complicated.
So yeah, climate change has a significant impact on renewable energy project itself. One very well-known impact is, of course, that of increasing temperatures, which is well studied, well understood. So some people tend to think that, okay, higher temperatures are good, but that's, as we know, not true. The higher the temperature, the lower the efficiency of the solar panels. So this way, the productions go down. But besides that, what we have also been seeing is that climate change has been increasing the volatility of the solar resource. So just this year, we know that in East Asia, China, Japan, and that part of the world, there were extremely high temperature events seen. But also what accompanied this was very high radiation. So, for example, in the month of July, we saw that the global solar radiation was 40% higher than the long-term average.
Wow.
Now, yeah. So now seeing something like 20-25% deviation plus minus month to month, that is normal. But we have a data record of something like 25 years. So this is the first time in the 25-year history we have seen such a significant anomaly in Japan. And sometimes that's good news for the power plant owners, because if there is 40% more solar radiation, we might think that translates to 40% more output, but not always, because that also means you have more curtailment. So some of that electricity is then getting curtailed as well. And then the other thing that we are seeing is that the occurrence and intensity of extreme weather events is increasing. So those extreme events that used to happen once in a century. We might see it once every 30 years or so. And sometimes we tend to ignore this, but just one recent discussion with a colleague just showed me how important this is. So recently, my colleagues have been working on a hail risk map globally. And I come from the city of Calcutta in West Bengal in India. And in that hail risk map, he showed me, it seems that West Bengal in India has one of the highest hail risks in the world. And I told him, no, that can't be true. I grew up there. Yes, there were a few hail events, but nothing serious, nothing like what we see in Texas. And then he showed me a record that the biggest known hail event with the biggest diameter of the hailstones was in the early 1980s in Bangladesh.
Okay.
And I was not aware of that fact, because that was even before I was born. So it happened in the early 90s, but who says that it cannot happen in 5 years from now? Solar power developers need to take into account these kinds of risk, and maybe they go for PV panels with more sturdy glass, or have some other safety mechanisms in place so that the design is more resilient. So I do feel that we don't give significant thought when doing the risk assessment to these kind of things, but we ought to.
That's really interesting. I mean, if you would have quizzed me and asked me biggest hailstorm in the world, where would it have been? I would have definitely picked a different country. I would not have thought about Bangladesh. But now you work with hundreds of organizations all around the world. Can I ask what partnerships or collaborations are you especially prioritizing in the Asia area to scale up renewable deployment and attract private capital?
So we have been partnering with government agencies on certain projects. We also tend to partner with various technical advisors who are in turn working with lenders, banks to do the due diligence of the projects. So on the front of government agencies, one recent example that comes to my mind is we have worked with the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources in Indonesia, where we have done a detailed geospatial mapping for the Jamali grid, which is the Java, Madura, and Bali electricity grid. And we looked at different layers, like, of course, the solar resource annual availability, but also the solar resource variability, the terrain, the nearness to the substations, protected areas, and so on. And we came up with a list of 140 sites which are suitable for building a large-scale solar power plants and ranked them based on the various scores. So this is one example of an exercise we have been doing. We also are looking forward to partner with grid operators in the region to help them with accurate forecasting, because what we have seen is that when solar power is still in a very nascent stage, maybe 2% or 5% of the energy mix, still forecasting is not taken so seriously. But as soon as it becomes 10, 15% of the energy mix, it becomes a very important aspect to focus on. And so this is another area. So it's not one specific area, but we are on the lookout for various kinds of partnerships in the region.
So now that's quite interesting. Now we got to move to the question of the times, so to speak, which is AI, artificial intelligence. Now it's increasingly being used to optimize renewable projects, from site selection to predictive maintenance. How is your company integrating AI into its solar resource assessment and forecasting tools? And what specific opportunities do you see in Asia, in the Asian markets, where data quality and grid stability are really a pressing challenge?
Yeah, so we are thinking how to utilize AI across the project lifecycle, from site selection to project operation. But the most immediate project where we see AI being helpful is forecasting. So here today, we are using multiple different numerical weather prediction models. Each model provides a slightly different weather or radiation forecast. And until recently, we had been doing some kind of weighted averaging or a simple combination of the different models. But AI opens up new possibilities because with the help of AI, we can try to look at the historical performance of different weather models at each location and create very customized site-specific combinations which are empowered by AI on how we blend the different numerical weather prediction models to provide a more accurate forecast.
Understood. That's great. One final question, Harsh, which is kind of your long-term views. I mean, you've been around this sector for a while now. In terms of the next 5, 10, or even 20 years, what innovations in solar resource assessment or forecasting do you think will be most transformative for the Asian markets?
So I've been in the energy industry for a bit more than a decade, and my observation has been that the energy industry can be sometimes conservative and slow to adopt new innovation.
Yes.
And that's very understandable because, as we discussed, the renewable energy industry and energy industry as a whole is a lot about upfront capital. And you don't want to disturb things when they seem to work relatively well, right?
Just don't fix it if it's not broken. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think the innovations that will be adopted over the next 5-10 years, I think that they already exist today. The technology is there. I do hope that the adoption will happen in the next 5 years and not next 10 years. And I think it is important to move ahead with times because the legacy approaches that have been used for the last 5-10 years, especially in the renewables, won't work in the next 5 years, especially because we are moving from an era of subsidized renewable energies where you were paid for the electricity irrespective of when it was generated. So all you cared about, I'm putting my plant over here and what's my annual generation going to be, and I'm happy. But we are moving towards an era where it just doesn't matter how much of electricity you generate, but it also matters when you generate that electricity. So when the time aspect of it comes into the equation, the energy systems have to be more sophisticated, more complex. You need to combine different sources of renewable energies together. And the legacy approaches of yesterday simply won't work then. You have to adopt.
Right. And also, perhaps, I don't want to put words in your mouth because you're the expert. I'm not. I'm just a finance guy. I'm not a data guy, data specialist. But isn't it also true that although the overall capacity, say, 20 years ago was quite low, there's quite a lot of experience that has been gained. So, and then you've got, say, the 2000s, you gained a little bit experience. Then the 2010s, you've gained more experience. And now you've got more capacity, more experience. So as you're gaining more experience, you can do things more efficiently. And on top of it, you've got this advent of organizations like yourselves. I'm sure your data forecasting and prediction is infinitely better in 2025 than it was 10 years ago, it was 20 years ago when you actually had less data available. Would that be correct? Am I barking the wrong tree here?
No, that's definitely true. See, we did install the second terawatt of solar much faster than the first terawatt, right? So I have no doubts that the third terawatt of solar is going to come at the same rate or if not faster. But there might be some hiccups on the way. So yeah, we need to learn from all the experiences that we have and focus it in the right manner. So I'm all positive and I'm very hopeful that the energy transition will continue at a very rapid pace in the Asia Pacific and rest of the world as well.
That's great. Harsh, thank you so much for your time. I learned quite a lot. Apologies for some of the more simplistic, naive questions, given that you're an expert. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for participating in the Asia Climate Finance podcast today.
Thank you, Joseph. It was a pleasure to speak with you as well.
Please note that the Asia Climate Finance podcast is provided for educational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice. Any information discussed should not be relied upon for making investment decisions. Listeners should always seek advice from a suitably qualified and authorized investment professional. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of their current or former employers or of the podcast host or producers.